Okay, so me being me and the complete technophobe that I am, and being a bit new to this webinar and Zoom thing, I forgot to press record today. But I've had a number of requests for the webinar from today, so I'm going to redo it. So just a bit of information for anyone who doesn't know me. I'm Graham Chatterley from Changing Perceptions Limited, training, etc. And I put this webinar together based around a post I put on from things I was seeing on social media, lots of stuff about how people were feeling in lockdown, not being able to get out, how they were a bit more irrational, a bit more uncomfortable, fidgety, restless, maybe a bit inconsequential in their reactions to things. They were snappy at the kids, and they were partners and stuff like that. And I could see a clear link with how that feels for our vulnerable kids that are in schools all the time. They're feeling those kind of ways. So I'm going to share my slideshow from today and repeat what I did this afternoon. Okay. Okay, so what have our feelings during lockdown taught us about vulnerable children? And the best place for me to start is in terms of aggression or uncontrolled behaviour or outbursts or whatever you want to call them. What is the best way to categorise them? We talk about types of behaviour, and we have lots of sort of strict behaviour policies and systems within schools, and if a child behaves this way, then they get this consequence and stuff like that. But for the children that are returning to school and for how we're feeling in the home, I like to categorise it in terms of motives when it comes to aggression. And there will be those circumstances where that child, or that adult for that matter, behaves in a way that is uncontrolled. What they are experiencing is a perceived threat that they instantly react to without any control whatsoever. And we'll look at the possible different things that the brain can do in that situation. But they've perceived that threat, and it's not that it's the levels of threat have been sort of worked out or anything like that. It's threat is a threat. Bang, this is your reaction. And those children that have got very limited communication and reactions and things like that, that's what they will go straight to, is a reaction that is a fear response. It's instinctive, it's without thought. They've been hijacked. There's no time for any other part of the brain to intervene, and bang, that's you can have the lashing out and the extreme behaviour and the inconsequential behaviour. Now, that for me is something that we have to be very careful about how we go about responding to, and we'll come to that in a minute. The second type of reaction, which is going to be the main part of the course, the second motive, is when we become overwhelmed. We have such a build-up of different feelings that we can't get rid of, and because of that, we spill over. People talk about a stress cup that fills and fills and fills and fills and then overflows. We might be in a situation like we are in home at the moment, where we're locked in, where we've got little frustrations building on little frustrations to bigger frustrations, and all of that stuff, and eventually all the stresses and everything else, it all overflows, and we end up with a reaction that is a very emotional response. It's very built up, it's very pent up, it's following a pattern. We may have tried some intervention strategies that have just not quite worked for us on this occasion, and eventually those scales will tip. The other one that we've got is a more controlled aggression. Somebody's had the time to think, somebody's had plenty of opportunity to get themselves calm. They may have gone away and thought about what they're going to do, and then they choose the aggressive behaviour. It's almost like a retribution or a revenge style, and that for me is where punitive consequences may need to come in But for the other two, that would not be the line that I would be taking. I'd be go at a much more restorative approach. Now, if we think about again where we're at in terms of being at home and all that kind of stuff, if you were to look at it from a law perspective and you think of crimes and stuff, and I'm not, you know, there may be times while we're at home at the moment and we feel like we want to kill our partner and stuff like that. Hopefully we're not going to do that. But if we did, then the question that would be asked when we went to court for that trial would be, was what happened self-defense? And if it was self-defense, if it was deemed as life-threatening, then we would probably not end up with a serious consequence for that action. And that's to prove in court what self-defense is. And we have to prove to that judge that what happened was a threat to our life. Now, that's fine. But again, like I said before, within that situation, a threat is a threat. It could be the threat of death. It could be the threat of something what we would see as minor or minuscule. It makes no difference to that particular child. So self-defense again is self-defense, and we've got to look at that and see it in that way. Now, the overwhelmed, when it builds and builds and builds and builds, and then somebody snaps, that is a crime of passion. And a crime of passion, again, it would have a consequence with it. It would be serious, more serious than self-defense, but it would not be as serious as if somebody went away premeditated and then planned and took out that situation. So we've got to look at those things differently, and what we can do with them. Because if we see all aggressive actions the same, if we look at the behaviour and we just go, this is the behaviour that therefore needs this consequence, then we're missing that valuable opportunity to learn why it's happening. And the big thing about children who are going to be returning to school is there's going to be all kinds of underlying feelings and problems and experiences that if we don't get to the bottom of, we're going to have a real problem with those managing their behaviour as they come back to school. Now, I don't want to spend a load of time looking at the brain, but I do want to sort of touch on the triune model, if you like. Now, within neuroscience circles, this has been debunked to a degree because of the timings of when different parts of the brain developed and all that kind of stuff. But for the purpose of what we're doing, having those three parts of the brain really sort of help us to understand what's happening within that child's brain, or even that adult brain that's currently at home. So at the bottom, we have the reptilian brain, which is designed to keep us alive. It's where your fight, flight, freeze response comes from. It happens in a split second. It makes a decision there and then. It releases the chemicals needed to help you to survive, and that is the job of that amygdala and reptilian brain, and that's what's causing us to have these feelings that we've got, and this uncomfortableness that we've got, which I'll look at in a minute. Above that, you've got a limbic brain, which is all about emotion and all about your thoughts and your feelings, whether we're frustrated, we're angry, we're outraged, all of these different things, we're upset, all come from that center of the brain. And then we've got the frontal cortex, which is our thinking part of the brain. And that thinking part of the brain, when working well, is the bit that goes, it's okay, there's no threat here, you can calm down. So you don't need to have that uncontrolled reaction. You don't need to become overwhelmed because there's nothing to worry about. Now, if you've got a child that has experienced any kind of trauma or particular types of trauma, or they've got ADHD or things like that, then there's a good chance that frontal cortex is underdeveloped. And if that frontal cortex is underdeveloped, then we have to work a lot harder to switch it on, which means that it's harder and it takes more time to get that bit of the brain to go, right, there's no threat here, you can calm down, which is why we can't calm these children down sometimes, and why some children that we've got are constantly in that hyper vigilant state, always perceiving threat. Now, when our options are fight, flight, and freeze, but we're locked in, then we've lost that flight response. So because we've lost that flight response, because we can't get out, that really does limit our options, and we've only got those other two to go off. Now, for us at home, we're feeling trapped because of that situation. But for many of our vulnerable children in school, they can't get out of school. They can't get out of that classroom. They can't leave the class without permission. They're essentially locked in the building and things like that. And that will give them that feeling of being trapped, which means that for children that we've got at school, they're losing their flight response as well. It may be that for whatever reason, they are prevented from leaving the room, and therefore we take away the flight response. We really only give that child one option, and that is to try and fight the way out, and that can be a really ropey position to be in within schools. This is a slide that I often use when I'm training, and you put it out there to the people that are sat there, and you look at those four different things: physical aggression, crying, being verbally abusive, and possibly hiding. And these are reactions that you may see from children, and you may see from people at home when they haven't got that flight option available. So the problem is that there really isn't any difference between all of these different things. The difference is that reptilian part of your brain decided this is what your reaction is going to be. Now, the problem with that is that because of the way that we react, it elicits a different response from us. And in order to manage these different things, we have to go against our natural instincts. So if we've got a child that is crying or upset, then our natural instinct is to go and comfort, is to put an arm around the shoulder, is to try and make them feel better and be supportive and be nurturing. If we've got a child that is refusing or hiding, is under a desk, is not conforming, then we are in a position where our natural instinct is to get that child to conform, is to get them out from under the table, is to get them to do what they're doing. But their freeze response in that position there is them trying to keep themselves feeling safe. If we've got no flight response and we take the freeze response away, then we are leaving that child with only one option. And we don't want to escalate that situation into a fight response. Similarly, with verbally abusive children, or again at home, you may be in that position now where people are having rows and people are being verbally challenging and things like that. Again, we have to go against our natural instinct. The natural instinct when somebody verbally abuses you is to give it back. The first really good training session I ever encountered was with a guy called Rob Long, and what Rob Long would do, he would come in a room, and he's very sort of lively character, and he had different mantras, and he would say, right, what do you fight fire with? And everybody would go, fire, and he'd go, why? You know, the fire brigade wouldn't, they'd use water and they'd use foam and they'd use something that's actually going to put the fire out. And that's what we need to do. We need to go against our natural instinct to fight fire with fire, and we need to take that water and whatever else to get that situation to calm that child down. The other thing that we potentially might encounter is the child that's being physically aggressive. And if that child is being physically aggressive, then our natural instinct for that physical threat, be it at school, at home, wherever, on the street, when somebody's being physically aggressive, our natural instinct, again, is either to fight back, but much more commonly is to reject that behaviour. And when we're naturally rejecting that behaviour, then our natural rejection within schools is exclusion. And, you know, one of the fastest tracks to exclusion within school is to be physically aggressive. So we have to manage those situations, and we have to understand that the child isn't choosing those reactions. Those reactions are chosen by their self-defense part of the brain within a split second. Now, it might be that the frontal cortex can kick in time to not get the physically aggressive behaviour, but for many children, they haven't got that developed enough at this point. Now, from a learning perspective, we have to understand that the two can't work together. If you have got a child that's in their reptilian brain, they are not thinking, they are not retaining information, they are not remembering what you're saying to them. Similarly at home, if you think about yourselves when you've been in a big row and you can't actually remember any of the details of that big row that you've been in, that's because you've been in your reptilian brain. You're not retaining any information in that moment in time. So if we want children to learn and we want children to understand the stuff that we're doing, we have to split that switch so that we're turning on the frontal cortex and thinking part of the brain. Because if we're hijacked to focus on self-defense, then there will be no thinking. I wrote an article a while back about the feelings of children that are in schools that have a zero tolerance approach, that use a lot of isolation and exclusion and things like that. And what they're seeing is that children who express their emotions get punished. So they are spending all of their time in a survival freeze type state, trying to manage their own emotions, because if they let them overflow, then they're going to be in trouble. And that is an exhausting thing to keep doing over and over and over again. And we try, and we're at home and we're probably trying, and we're trying to manage what we're feeling all of the time. And because we're trying to manage it all of the time, we're not actually able to think about what it is that we're doing. We can't remember things, we can't retain information, and we can't learn. So you will see children in schools who tick along lovely in the background, they never bother anybody, their behaviour is always good, but they're 2 or 3 grades below what they should be getting. That for me is a warning sign that that child is not using the right parts of their brain, and they are in survival state at school too much. And it's something that we've really got to think about. Now, if we do manage to flick the switch, if we have had a situation where the reptilian brain has said, we're going to fight here, we're going to fight now. Here's a load of cortisol. Here's a load of adrenaline. And these chemicals have been released in our body, and they're designed to help us to run away, and they're designed to go to the muscles and use loads of energy, but we haven't used them. We've managed to get ourselves calm. We've managed to regulate ourselves to a degree that we don't need to use that aggressive response. What do we do with the chemicals? And the children are almost punished sometimes because they've managed that situation. I mentioned before at the very, very beginning, the posts that would go on the internet about the adults who are feeling irritable and fidgety and agitated and moody and uncomfortable, snappy. That's because they've got the skills to manage the threat and the release of everything, so that they don't go to extreme levels of aggression or uncontrolled behaviour, but they haven't managed to stop the chemicals going in the first place. So we're left with those things running around the body. And cortisol can be the stress hormone can be extraordinarily damaging over long-term periods of time. You know, it will damage all of your organs, it will cause lots of secondary illnesses and all that kind of thing. So stress hormone is extremely damaging if we don't use it. So if we've got that situation where the child has had those chemicals released, they've done exceptionally well to not blow up, we have to help them out, because if we're expecting them to just sit there with all this stuff running around the body, fidgety, uncomfortable, trying to maintain calm, not being able to retain information, then we're not doing our jobs and we're not helping them. So what we need to do is we need to individually re-regulate them. And the thing, and it's done for the best intentions again, is schools will do things like, we'll say, right, we're gonna have a day of mindfulness, and we do lots of mindfulness activities. And that's brilliant for probably a quarter of the children, because mindfulness might be their brilliant way of re-regulating. But for somebody else, it might be something that does the opposite. I know, me personally, I need to go do something physical. If I don't do some strong physical exercise at least once every couple of days, I start to get irritable. I start to get agitated, and I know then that I need to do that. So I need that physical exercise. That's what re-regulates me. If somebody said to me, we're going to do mindfulness, it won't re-regulate me. Somebody puts crashing waves on, that will have the opposite effect of what's designed. Somebody tells me to imagine myself on a beach, that's not going to re-regulate me. That's going to make me worse. For others, it might be an art or craft activity, some very creative approach to these different things. Some it might be a sensory thing, and the idea again that, you know, it's kind of a myth that it should be severe learning difficulty settings and profound learning difficulties is where they have all the sensory rooms and sensories. Bringing in sensory play was one of the best things we ever did in our SEMH setting. And you know, whether it's fabrics, whether it's movement, whether it's different toys, certain children really respond incredibly well to that sensory approach, and it's well worth exploring that with your children if you are struggling to find something that will re-regulate them. The other one is the one that we're very good at home and we're probably using on a regular basis, but we don't use properly in schools, and we should. You know, what would you do if you've had a bad day at work? You know, you go home, you get a bottle of wine or a can of beer or whatever it is your drink of preference, you get on the phone to, or you talk to your partner and you have a proper good rant. And within that rant, you might have a few naughty words and different things like that. But what you're doing is you are offloading all of your stuff. You are getting rid of all of the stuff that's going. You're emptying out your cup, and you're making yourself feel more regulated and feel better. And we do that really well at home, but we don't do it well enough at schools. We don't give the children a safe place to just have a rant about what's bothering them. And they should be able to just offload. And if they use a few naughty words, then they use a few naughty words, and we shouldn't be stopping them doing that. We should be allowing them to release what they're doing the same way that you would yourself. It's one of the best ways of getting children to offload. And within that, you're probably going to find out a lot of the things that are bothering them, which can be really beneficial going forward. And this is quite a busy slide, but I think it's really, really, really powerful, and I'll work through it as we go. Now, again, going back to Rob Long said, low self-esteem leads to frustration, leads to anger. And I added aggression onto the end of that. And what I do in my groups is I'd say, right, give me all of the feelings that lead to aggressive behavior. So aggression is the behavior, and then you've got all the feelings that come before that, and are sort of driving the vehicle, if you like. And I was trying to work out a way in which I could explain this to the kids, and the way that they could visualize it, because emotional literacy is an incredibly difficult thing to teach. to talk about what is going on in the head as a feeling is very, very difficult. I usually do it from a sort of bottom-up approach, and what are you feeling in terms of, have you got a tummy ache, have you got any pain, have you got any tension, are you feeling hot, or those things can be attached to those physical feelings can be attached to mental feelings, and that's one way to go about it. But if you have got a situation where, first of all, can you identify what a child is feeling? And then further down the line, can you get them to identify what they're feeling? And if we go from anger, and one thing that you'll hear as something that's one of the buzz phrases that goes around is anger management. We do not manage anger. We do two things with anger. We can use it and channel it and get rid of it, with those re-regulation activities, maybe the physical exercise, whatever. So we can use it up, or we can suppress it. And when we talk about managing anger, what we're actually talking about is suppressing that anger. But if we're suppressing that anger, then we are putting that child in that situation where they're struggling and they're not able to think, and eventually they will overflow anyway. Now we need to get them off this train. So if they are in anger, then we use up the anger and we get them off the train. We might have lost the lesson, but we will do it. If we're further down the line, if we're sort of between low self-esteem and frustration, then there might be a lot more on offer for us at this point. We might have little jobs we can give them at this point, distractions. We might be able to get them to talk to us at this point. We can do all number of different things, timeouts, etc. might be able to come in at this point to get them off the train. But we have to get them off the train, otherwise we're just going to go from station to station to station to station, like a train line, and the final stop is going to be aggression. So that's sort of the four things I've got there as train stations. I will get all sorts of other things that come from the group, and I've just picked some of them there that may have come up: jealousy, lack of control, sadness, disappointment, all these different things. But whatever it is that child is feeling leads us to one of these stations. So if that child is feeling jealousy, then that's probably going to make them angry. If they are feeling let down, then that's frustration or anger. If they're feeling sadness, that's probably impacting on self-esteem. Whatever it is, we've got to pinpoint where they are on the train line, and we then put in the intervention. Now, what we really want the child to do is off their own knowledge, is to put the hand up and say, "Sir, I feel really angry. Can I go and have a run around the yard for a minute just to get my head straight? Miss, I feel really frustrated today. Can I go and talk to such and such a person?" We want that child to be able to manage their own feelings, but that might be beyond some of the children that we've got. But the children that we have, and we get to aggression, and this is the same thing at home, if we have got to a point where we've behaved aggressively, we've gone overboard, we've been inconsequential, we've upset people and we didn't mean to, then we are going to be in a position where we are either feeling guilty or we're feeling shame. Now, if we're feeling guilty, guilt is not always a bad feeling to have. If a child's done something wrong and they've hurt somebody, we want them to feel guilty about it. If you've been out of order at home, we want you to feel guilty about it. And then when we attach that guilt to a restoration, then we can actually build a positive into this. But what we don't want is that guilt to turn to shame. Because guilt is, I've done a bad thing, and anybody who works with who's ever followed the work of Brené Brown, if you are currently working your way through a Netflix series, or you're into Tiger King or whatever at the moment, then take a break from that and put an hour and a half of your time to watch Call for Courage by Brené Brown. It is a phenomenal, powerful documentary that's well worth watching. And she talks about the difference between guilt and shame, and the difference between I've done a bad thing, which can be repaired, or I am bad. And once you get to that position of I am bad, then that is going to be the way that they are going to behave, because they're going to try and prove that narrative all of the time, and it's a really difficult place to get away from. Now, that guilt and shame feeds into low self-esteem, low self-worth, and it starts the process all over again. Now, I put 3 things at the bottom there because those 3 feelings are going to be really prevalent when we do go back to school. Anxiety can send you to any of those stations at any point, as can fear. But the big one is going to be the grief. We are going to have children who are coming back to school who have experienced grief. Now, adults don't know how to manage grief. The children aren't going to have any idea what it is and what to do with it, and it's going to feed into lots of those different feelings. And all we have to do is try and work out where they are, what to do, and keep working with them until they start to talk to us. Now, in terms of if we come in and do nothing, we guarantee that bottom train line. And of all the children that have ever come to the SCMH school where I was, we had children who were on the autistic spectrum, we had children on the ADHD spectrum, we had children with trauma, we had children with attachment, we had children with learning difficulties and sound processing and visual processing difficulties. But they all had one thing in common. They'd all experienced too much failure and therefore had really, really low self-esteem. But from low self-esteem, it doesn't have to go to frustration. If we intervene at low self-esteem and we work our socks off to build that self-esteem up, then we can get to something else. And another brilliant video is something called Poker Chips, which it's very dated, it's very American. Some of the terminology is not great in it, but the message is absolutely phenomenal. And within that, it talks about the idea of giving children poker chips, giving them positives every single day to build up their self-esteem. And one of the ways to do that, something that was talked about in that video, is something from Bob Brooks, who came up with the concept of the islands of competence. And that is being a talent scout, and that is finding whatever it is that child is really good at and using that. And it could be the most random of things. You know, they might know all of the Pokemon. They might know, they might be able to do more keepy-uppies than any of the mates. Any number of different things. The example given in the video is that, you know, if you've got a child and the only thing that they can do well is use a Phillips head screwdriver, then while they're at school or they're in their bedroom, you undo every screw in the house, give them that screwdriver and say, go on, you do that, because nobody can do it as well as you. And we use that talent scouting to build that self-esteem up. And if we do that, then the next stop, rather than frustration, might be a sense of belonging. You know, we've found a talent that they can show the other kids, and the other kids can go, wow, that's amazing, you know, and they start to feel that sense of belonging. One of the children that came to us, and he didn't look like a rapper, and they didn't want to take him seriously at first, and they would start laughing at him when he would just randomly start rapping in the corridor, and then they realized, wow, this kid is actually really, really good. And you could see that boy grow 5 feet every day when he was when he was doing the rapping on the corridors, and people started to accept him, and you could see him starting to feel that belonging. And then we found out that the other big skill he's got is magic, and he would come in and do magic tricks. And again, he didn't look right, but he was brilliant, and the other children would accept him for that. And he built that belonging, and the impact on that was self-control. And then we had a far, far happier child by the end of that child's journey. And that's what we need to be doing. One of the other things I'll ask my group to do is to think of a loved one, think of their own children, think of their nieces, nephews, even thinking of a pet. When those loved ones go into the care of somebody else, what are your expectations? And you will have those things, like you want them to be happy, you want them to feel trust and treated as an individual, and safety. And we'll look at all those things in a minute. But what we really, or one of the things that really comes out, and the thing that I've noticed doing training over the last decade, is the difference when it comes to starting school. And children years ago would have come to reception with a different skill set, which equipped them to manage much better within that environment. Because of various different things, because mainly I think because of technology, children are being occupied rather than played with. They're being distracted and stuff. So the need for boundaries is less. So children are coming into schools age 4, and their experiences of adults is that they're never or rarely told no. They don't have to wait. They've never had to share the parents' attention. And then they're walking into this environment with 30 other children, and they're frustrated at having to wait, and they're a bit confused at this new thing that's going on, and they're angry at being told no, or being told to wait. And they've got the fear of the unknown, and they're anxious because that teacher is choosing to speak to that other child when I want to speak to them. So is that child more important than I am? And all these things that they're trying to worry and try to understand about it, and it makes it really difficult. Now, you haven't got many responses when you are a 4-year-old, and what have you got to draw upon? So if things aren't going well at home and you're a 4-year-old child, then the best thing that you can do is throw a tantrum, because if you throw a tantrum, you'll get the attention, you probably get your own way, and that works at home, so it should work at school. Then if that doesn't work, then you're probably going down that freeze line, and you're probably going to withdraw, and you go, I've got too many different feelings going on right now, I don't want to be part of this. And you start to withdraw at age 4. You're in a bad position there, and you can knock on with that and start to avoid. We end up with a situation where what I was having when I'd got children coming to me at age 12, 13, and they were still throwing the tantrums, they were still avoiding, they were still scared of the environment, and because of the situation that they've been in with the adults, that was what was happening. Now we have to focus on equipping them as best we can within that reception area, because if we don't equip them and put those base skills in, then further down the line we're going to be having the same problems. We're just having those same problems with a bigger child. Now what we've got to think about with regard to the lockdown and children at home and what's happening is, we may have made progress in the idea of sharing, and in the idea of being in that room of lots of other children, and we've gone back to never being told no, being occupied with technology, being given whatever they want to keep quiet. And so we are going to have regressed in that respect with many of our children. We have to be aware of that. All that frustration, confusion, anger, that fear, anxiety, they're all going to be back when children return to school. The other, alongside boundaries, we've got social skills. And again, it's a similar principle. That child who's just had an iPad or just had a telly or whatever has never shared toys, they've never took turns, they've never shared attention, and they've never played imaginatively. And imaginative play is so important for the children that we've got. I'll never forget when I first started, and we were an EBD school at this point, and I was asked to do an after school club, and I'd got big ideas for this after school club. I was going to get trampolines out and all sorts of stuff, the weird and wonderful things that we were going to do. And when I got there, there was 3 15-year-old boys with a car mat playing with toy cars, completely engaged, happily playing away. And this was a very weird situation for me to see that. But what was happening there was basically those children had never played imaginatively, and so they were exploring that, and they were meeting a need that they had. And whatever the need is that these children have, we have to meet it. If we don't meet it, it will just keep festering, and it will keep building up and building frustration and everything else. So we have to meet that need. Now, you will have children that go to you, can I go and mentor with the younger ones? You'll have children in juniors at primary school can say, can I go down to the infants and help out and stuff like that? And when you get feedback from the member of staff that's down there, you know, did they do a good job of mentoring? Were they really helpful? And they'll say, no, they weren't even interested in the other children. They just wanted to play with their stuff. They just wanted to go and play with a Lego and play with a sandpit and do that imaginative play and all those different things. Well, yeah, they haven't done what they said they were going to do, but they've met the need that they needed to meet, and that's the important thing for you. So if a child did that, then I would be more than happy for that to happen. And I know you've got to balance it up against what's being missed out on in learning and things like that, but the payoff at the end of the day is much more beneficial, in my opinion. Now, these children who have never shared and never took turns and stuff, they can have a big confusion of this new situation that they've got in, and all the rules they've got to follow, and the rules in the games, and creating games and changing games and all these different things. Got to manage these things. But also they've got this built-in desire to dominate. Anybody who's ever been to a toddler group, that place is a war zone. It's carnage. You've got kids snatching, you've got kids grabbing each other, you've got pushing and shoving, you've got tears, you've got tantrums, you've got everything going on. But what you've also got is a huge amount of learning. Children learning how to share that space, how to not dominate each other, how to belong with the peers and all that kind of stuff. And when they do it at age 2, when they're toddlers, then they're in a much better position when they come to school at age 4. If they do it when they're 4, they're in a much better position when they're 10. So the sooner that we do it, the better it is in the long run. Because again, if we're in this situation of confusion and fear and confliction and whatever it is that they've got, then the only options the child has got in terms of behaviour is, do I try to assert my dominance and intimidate with aggression, or do I give up and withdraw and avoid? And neither of those are good choices, but they're the only ones that the child has got. So we've got to work with that. Now, I've been a big fan of Maslow's hierarchy for a long time, but I have my own version of it. Now, rightly or wrongly, this is what I see and this is what I use, and if anybody wants to steal it, then feel free to do so. Now, whereas Maslow would have the sort of the physical needs and stuff being on the, I sort of encompass it all within safety. And it's safety is a concept of how that child feels, and we need to do everything that we possibly can to make them feel safe. The problem is we're going to have children that have been in unsafe environments. The bigger problem that we've got is we sent them there. And so if we've been in a position where we had trust, and we had that child trusting the adults around them, we've lost that trust, because for some we've sent them to unsafe places through no fault of our own. We couldn't do nothing about it, but that's not how the child will see it. we also abandon them. And so when we come back, we are going to see lots of attachment style behaviors because we let them, we've left them. So we are going to have children who, usually they're children that have got attachment issues with regard to having a parent that was maybe a problems with alcohol, problems with drugs, a parent that sometimes is incredibly caring and loving and available, and other times completely not. So that child doesn't know where they stand. They don't know when that parent is going to be available, so they try and have them there all the time. You as a teacher are another adult, and therefore they don't know when you're going to be available. They want you there all the time. They will be the child that's hanging off your trouser leg. They'll be the child that constantly wants reassurance, that keeps asking questions, that keeps touching base, because they want that connection, and they want that sort of knowing that you're there all the time as a safety blanket. Now, again, they don't know when we're going to leave again, so they might adopt that strategy to keep us where they've got us when we go back to school. There'll be other children who will be wary of us, who don't want to invest because they invested in us, they trusted us, they showed us their feelings, and we left them, and therefore they will associate those feelings with weakness and not want to let that guard down again, because it's better to not get let down than it is to be hurt again. One of the quotes I often use is it's better to live in the comfort of misery than to face the misery of uncertainty. And it takes a lot to put yourself out there and risk being hurt again. And that's where a lot of children will be now after lockdown. The other response that we may get is we may get a lot of anger. Again, we've left them, we've hurt them, they're angry at us for it. We're going to have to overcome that and rebuild that trust. The position that a lot of children were in pre-lockdown was where I've got the white line. They were in a position where they had the trust of adults, but they didn't feel like they belonged with their peers. And the best example with this was I went to go and see a year one child, and I went into PE, and within PE, he was really struggling. He was dysregulated. He was messing with equipment. He was spoiling people's games. He was lashing out. He was really, really struggling, and he asked if he could leave, and his TA took him out. As soon as he was out of that environment with his peers, it was almost like a weight was visibly lifted off him. He relaxed. He started talking to his TA. He was engaged in talking about the wall display, about the different countries and what animals lived in different countries. There was learning going on. There was information being retained. And it was a completely different child. And then the children returned from PE, and it was like that switch was flicked back. And what we had with that child was he could sense, because he was so hypervigilant, he could sense that the other children were wary of him, and they didn't trust him, and they were going to reject him. What's the best thing when you believe that you're going to face rejection? What's the one thing that you can control? Well, I will reject them first. So he would behave in a way that rejected them first. The other children were rightly wary of him because he was inconsequential, he was inconsistent in his responses, and he gave them every reason to be wary. So we were in this cycle of he was behaving that way because he was expecting the rejection, and he was getting rejection because he was behaving that way. And it took time to sort of rebuild that process, and starting off with one other child and playing and to a small group and working our way up, and I expect that to get a lot better for him. Now, once you belong within the group, once you don't fear the rejection, it's far easier to be courageous. And if we want courage from our children in their learning, because nothing, going back to Brené Brown, we achieve nothing good in our lives without being courageous. To ask somebody on a date, to go on that job interview, to go and ask the bank for a business loan, to ask somebody to marry you, those things require us risking rejection massively and putting ourselves out there. And the way that children learn the best is when we push that learning and we ask them to go out of their comfort zone and we ask them to risk failure. And if we've got a situation where we've got belonging and they don't feel like they're going to be rejected if they get something wrong, then that's when children will put their hand up and try and answer that question. So we have to have those base blocks in place in order to get the courage. And if we get the courage, then, you know, Maslow would have self-actualization at the top of there. I think happiness goes to the top of there because that's what we want from the child. If we want them to achieve, we need them to be happy at the top of that pyramid. And anybody who's done Thrive or whatever, you know, this would be done similar with a Jenga wall. If we take the bottom bits out, we make that unsteady. If we're missing bits at the bottom of this, then it's incredibly unsteady, and we aren't going to have that secure pyramid that we need for those children. The experiences bag was inspired, and I'm sure there's something similar knocking about the internet, I just couldn't find it. But the experiences bag for me was inspired by one of our girls that we had. And she'd experienced lots of failure at lots of different settings. And she came to us and she had a half an hour walk to school every morning. Not very often on time, I might add. But during her half an hour walk to school, she would forecast in her head all of the things that happened on the previous day, the previous week, using those things to forecast what was going to happen when she walked through that door. And because if you think of the balls as reds are negative experiences, blues are positive experiences, she had a bag of red balls. And so if she arrived at school and was late and was asked where she'd been or anything like that, she was put on the spot to make a decision there and then. She would reach in her bag of experiences and you could almost guarantee she was going to bring out a negative one and therefore a negative experience and get herself into more bother and end up with some more red balls going into that bag. And that was the cycle that she was in all of the time. And we realized that we needed to change the narrative for this child. So one thing that we could do was, as well as not putting her on the spot, we could go one step further than that, and we could actually give her time in that situation to look through the bag. So if she was late, we wouldn't rush her into school, wouldn't rush her into class. We would say, right, we're not in a great spot here, you know what time it is now, but we'll come and talk about it in a minute. Okay? Have a think about what we're going to do about it and what we can plan for tomorrow or whatever, or something like that. And we give her time to sift through that bag and see if she can find a blue ball in that bag in order to pick out a better response. So time will help, but actual help will help even more. You know, can we sit with her and look through that bag and find some blue balls for her? Last week, when you got here at this, then that was brilliant. When somebody put you in that position, you could easily have got really angry at them, but you didn't. That was really good. You know, I saw you being really helpful with, you know, the other day. That was really good. So we can pick out the blue balls for her, hand them to her and say, right, this is your response for this situation. So we can give her time, we can give her help, but most importantly, we can give her more balls, give her more blue balls in that bag. you know. And that's where we go back to being a talent scout, finding those things, finding those little things that we can make into things that can go in that bag as a ball. And it might be a bit of kindness, it might be where they've helped you, it might be where they've done the right thing at the right time, it might be where they've managed to not do the wrong thing. We'll take whatever positives we can get and we'll put them in that bag, so that if we come to a situation again where that child is put on the spot there and then and has to reach in with a lucky dip and grab something out of that bag, if we've tipped that scale and we've moved the odds in her favour and there's more blues and reds in that bag, then there's a chance she'll pick a good reaction out. And then we don't add to the negativity. And every time we pick a blue ball, we get another blue ball. And that is what we're looking to do for that child, so that when she's coming to school, she's forecasting a positive day and a positive outcome. And therefore it doesn't become that self-fulfilling prophecy. I've used the conflict spiral for a long time, and I think it's really, really important for when we try and get these children back into school. You know, and if we're in a position where, due to the situations that they've had, we might have those feelings towards staff of attachment issues. Sorry, we might have a situation where they feel like nobody cares about them, everybody left them, nobody's checked in on them. You know, even though we probably have, it doesn't mean that they believe that that's the case. We might have a lack of trust, and we might have a child that feels unsafe. If those are the experiences, then they're going to be in a position where, you know, going back to the train, they're going to feel that low self-esteem, that frustration, that anger, and fear, probably. What are our options? We can avoid, we can be challenging, we can be aggressive, defiant, whatever we choose to do, but it's not going to be anything good. Now, what do we do in reaction to that? If we go down that punitive line, if we use those behaviour systems that says, well, you've behaved this way, therefore this happened, then all we are going to do is damage that relationship further. Everything that we do when the children return should be focused on trying to get the relationships back to where they were. So instead of being punitive, we have to be more understanding of that behaviour. We have to validate the feelings, and we have to be more empathetic of their experiences. So if we can be more understanding, and we can be more supportive, and most importantly patient, and give them time and all those different things, then the experiences then become, well, I do belong here, they do want me here, people do care about me, I can trust these people, I can trust them, and I am safe. And if that's the experiences that school is giving them, then we feel safer, we feel calmer, and we feel more positive, and therefore the behaviours will be less aggressive, there will be more control there. You're not looking at a child that's in a state of self-defense because we've made them feel safe and calm. Therefore, we can remember what the strategies are for us to re-regulate, etc. And they're going to be more likely to talk to us because we've rebuilt that trust, and we start to repair both the relationship we have with that child, but also that child's self-esteem, also all elements of that child going forward. The two big takeaways that I want people to take from this training is, again, we're going back to Brené Brown, and we again have to go against our natural instincts, because our natural instincts are, when we see a child that's unhappy, we have to try and fix it, but we can't fix it. Children can smell sympathy a mile away. You know, we might have a child that is grieving, and we come in and we try and be sympathetic. They don't want us to be sympathetic. They want us to be empathetic. Don't want us to tell them that it's going to be okay, or that it could be better, or it could be worse, or anything like that. We just want them to be there and say, I'm glad you've told me, I'm going to support you, right? take as long as you need to get yourself back to this. And we validate the feelings, we don't try to fix them. You know, what's the thing we all do at home, and child is upset and a child is crying, and what's the first thing we say to them? Oh, don't cry. Why not? If you're upset and you want to cry, then have a cry. You know, we shouldn't be trying to stop children feeling what they're feeling. We need to validate those feelings. If they're angry, then it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to behave in an aggressive manner because you're angry, but feeling angry is okay. And if you do behave in an aggressive manner, then you shouldn't be overly blamed or punished for that. We just have to try and manage it, and we have to put it right. But we can't fix what the children are feeling. We just have to be there with them and support them with it. And that's a big thing, again, when they come back after, whenever they come back, that's something that we have to do. So if anybody wants to follow me, I'm on LinkedIn. There aren't many Graham Chatterleys about. I'm on Twitter at G-Chatterley, G-Chat without the E, Y at the end, too. And again, you know, the idea was do a free webinar, but if people have found it really useful, if they've enjoyed it, and they want to give a donation to Bernardo's, then that would be absolutely fantastic. And I'll share when I upload the video. I'll put the Just Giving page on there. And thank you for your time.